The Elementalist is one of 2 brand new event towers, and it can be obtained by either beating the winter event on hard mode or coughing up a whopping 799 Robux. Compared to the Snowballer, this tower is a lot more complicated, having 2 attack modes you can swap between, multiple abilities, and much more. So in this video, I'll be showcasing all of its stats, values, and uses, then give my personal ranking of how good it is. But before we start, make sure to check out my Christmas Corso plushie on makeshift.com. It's only going to be around for another week, and the first 200 supporters will get an exclusive role in my Discord. I absolutely love how its design turned out, and it's definitely not evil. There's a link to buy it in the description, and thanks to Makeshift for making this possible. Anyways, let's get back to the video. It costs 2,000 cash to place, so it's more of a mid to late game tower. When using it, you can choose a swap between fire mode and frost mode. When set to fire, its attacks will inflict a burn effect upon enemies, dealing damage over time. If set to frost, it applies a chill effect upon enemies, slowing them down. The slowness stacks with each hit, and each level has a different max slowness. Once you get it to level 2, each attack mode has a separate ability, but we'll get into that later. At level 0, it deals 3 damage, shoots and bursts of 3, has a fire rate of 0.208, a burst cooldown of 0.608, and has 12 range. When set to fire, it inflicts a burn effect which deals 10 DPS, lasts for 2 seconds for a total of 20 damage. This gives it a combined DPS of 18.79. Of course, it'll deal more DPS than this if it's targeting multiple enemies, but we'll take a more detailed approach at this after I've listed all the stats. For now, we'll just say this to keep things simple. When set to frost, it inflicts 5% slow every hit with a max of 45% and duration of 2 seconds. It has a DPS of 8.79, which is just the DPS from the gun since the chilling doesn't add any damage. At level 1, for a total of 3,500 cash, it deals 5 damage, shoots and bursts of 4, has a fire rate of 0.208, a burst cooldown of 0.608, and 15 range. When set to fire, the burn effect deals 16 DPS, lasts for 3 seconds for a total of 48 damage. This gives it a combined DPS of 32.23. When set to frost, it inflicts 7.5% slow every hit with a max of 45% and duration of 2 seconds. It has a DPS of 16.23. At level 2, for a total of 7,500 cash, it deals 10 damage, shoots and bursts of 4, has a fire rate of 0.208, a burst cooldown of 0.608, and 17 range. It can now also attack hidden enemies. When set to fire, the burn effect deals 16 DPS, lasts for 4 seconds for a total of 64 damage. This gives it a combined DPS of 48.48. When set to frost, it inflicts 7.5% slow every hit with a max of 50% and duration of 2 seconds. It has a DPS of 32.48. It now also gains 2 abilities, one for each attack mode. When set to fire, you can now use the heat wave ability every 40 seconds, which shoots out a hot ring around the tower, damaging, burning, and knocking back enemies in range. At this level, it deals 150 damage, 20 burn DPS for 5 seconds for a total 100 extra damage. So basically, it's a strong weapon against crowds with a very long cooldown. When set to frost, you can use the ice turret ability every 50 seconds, which lets you pick a spot to build an ice turret, which attacks nearby enemies, damaging and slowing them. Once an enemy reaches its max slowdown, they are temporarily frozen. At this level, it has 1 health, deals 10 damage, has a fire rate of 0.458, inflicts 25% slow per hit with a max of 50% and duration of 5 seconds, has a freeze time of 2 seconds, and 21.83 DPS. The turret has a lifespan of 45 seconds, giving a fantastic downtime of only 5 seconds. So that means you can almost always have one of these bad boys up. At level 3, for a total of 15,500 cash, it deals 12 damage, shoots and bursts of 5, has a fire rate of 0.208, a burst cooldown of 0.508, and 17 range. When set to fire, the burn effect deals 40 DPS and lasts for 2 seconds for a total of 80 damage. This gives it a combined DPS of 84.78. The heat wave now deals 250 damage and 30 burn damage for 5 seconds for a total of 150 extra damage. It also knocks enemies slightly farther back. When set to frost, it inflicts 10% slowdown per hit with a max of 50% and duration of 2 seconds. It has a DPS of 44.78. The ice turret now has 1 health, deals 20 damage, has a fire rate of 0.358, inflicts 25% slowdown per hit with a max of 50% and duration of 5 seconds, has a freeze time of 2 seconds, and 55.87 DPS. Finally, at level 4, for a total of 30,500 cash, it deals 15 damage, shoots and bursts of 7, has a fire rate of 0.133, burst cooldown of 0.408, and 17 range. When set to fire, the burn effect deals 40 DPS and lasts for 4 seconds for a total of 160 damage. That gives it a combined DPS of 127.06. The heat wave now deals 400 damage and 40 burn damage for 5 seconds for a total of 200 extra damage. It also knocks enemies slightly farther back. When set to frost, it inflicts 12.5% slowdown per hit with a max of 60% and duration of 2 seconds. It has a DPS of 87.06. The ice turret now has 1 health, deals 30 damage, has a fire rate of 0.308, inflicts 30% slowdown per hit with a max of 60% and duration of 5 seconds, has a freeze time of 2 seconds, and 97.4 DPS. And with that, we're finally done with the stats. Good lord, that was a lot. Anyways, let's take a look at this tower to see if it's even any good. If we're analyzing his DPS, we should start by looking at his fire mode. And because this is a mid to late game tower, I'm mainly going to be looking at its max level. Against a singular target, at max level, it deals 87.06 DPS with its gun and an extra 40 DPS with its burn for a combined 127.06 DPS. For a total of 30,500 cash, that gives it a value of 4.17 DPS per 1k spent, which is pretty mid. But it does get a lot better when facing a crowd, especially if you have it set to random targeting so it can effectively spread its burn. With just 5 5 enemies inflicted, that gives it a combined DPS of 327.06 and a value of 10.72. That may sound really good, but there is a glaring issue. You can only really get one fire elementalist as the burn effect doesn't stack. That means you can't get a lot of damage against crowds unless you seriously space this tower out across the track. The heat wave ability still could deal some good damage, but again, a big proportion of its damage does come from burn, and its cooldown is just way too long to be considered a reliable form of damage. Because of this, something like the mortar still significantly outclasses it in terms of crowd control. It's way more consistent, deals more damage, and you can get as many of them as you want without having to worry about them not being as effective. Although you could argue that its relatively high single target DPS gives it an advantage, but I don't think so. If you want to use it for single target DPS, you have to lock onto one enemy, and since the burn effect can't stack or indirectly hit enemies, you're no longer getting any great value. So unfortunately, in attempting to be a mix between single target and crowd control, it ends up being just alright at both of them. However, let's take a look at its frost version. Here we get some pretty nice stalling and some extra DPS from its turret. Considering the ice turret deals 97.4 DPS at max level and has a downtime of 5 seconds, you could argue that the frost elementalist is actually a better boss killer. With a turret, it deals a combined 184.46 DPS, giving it a value of 6.04. This is some pretty solid damage and not bad value. On top of that, most bosses you're attacking will be slowed heavily, meaning it can handle some surprisingly tanky enemies. But there are some issues. First of all, the turret has really bad range, so you can't expect it to be reliably doing any damage unless you're on a very easy map. It's also very fragile, being one shot by any attack. So against a boss that's stunned, it's getting absolutely smoked. It also doesn't have any hidden detection, unlike the tower itself. It's also just very outclassed in terms of stalling, with something like the electroshocker or frost blaster just being significantly better options as slowing down enemies. Overall, if I could describe this tower in one way, I would say it's decent at everything. It has decent value, decent single target DPS, decent crowd control, decent stalling, and decent coverage. But it's just that. It's just decent. It's not amazing at any of these. But before I give my official ranking, I have a couple of tips on how you can better use this tower. First of all, since there's only a 5-second cooldown between swapping attack modes, you can place the ice turret and then go straight back to fire. That lets you have some solid extra damage and stalling while still being able to handle crowds. But the biggest tip I can give is, instead of trying to use a tower like this, which tries to do everything but ends up being mid at everything, just bring multiple towers that excel in their own niche. You have 5 tower slots available, so you might as well use them. Still, this is an incredibly versatile tower, and I think it can always find a way to be helpful in any game. If you're in desperate need of a little bit more crowd control, a little bit more single target DPS, and a little bit more stalling, this tower can adapt for your needs. And for that reason, I'm going to rank it as a solid B tier. It's a super cool tower, but it unfortunately doesn't have the stats to be put in the meta. But let me know in the comments below how you feel about this tower and whether or not you agree with my ranking. This is a very complicated tower, so there very well could have been things I missed. And if you enjoyed, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to join the Blue Head Mafia. Also, if you want to talk to me, consider checking out my Discord. We got some pretty cool features, like a custom party finder bot that will automatically pair you up with other people who are trying to do the same strategy. There's a link to the server pinned in the comments. And finally, I want to give a huge shout out to these channel members for supporting my content. If you want to add me as a friend on Roblox or get early access to some of my videos, consider becoming a channel member. It helps me out a lot and I really appreciate it. Anyways, that's it for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.